What is up, Kickback Science listeners? And Merry Christmas! And welcome to Season 2 of Kickback Science. So this season, we shifted our focus a little bit. We're going to be doing more interviews with some of the experts that are on the front lines of the research we've been talking about in Season 1. Then you won't get bored of our voices all the time, just talking at you. So we kick off Season 2 with Dr. Peter Smoak today. Dr. Smoak is an assistant professor at New Mexico State University. His research focuses on the effects of medicinal, dietary, and botanical interventions, as well as exercise, on improvement of pancreatic islets and diabetes. He received his undergraduate and master's degrees in sport and exercise science from the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. He then went on to get his PhD in exercise physiology from the University of Northern Colorado, and then completed his postdoctoral training in islet biology and inflammation at Pennington Biomedical Research Center. So without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Smoak to the pod. Hello and welcome to Kickback Science Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Luke. This podcast is your place to get the tools and knowledge necessary to navigate the world of health and wellness. So kick back, let's talk science. This is good content. This stuff has gone great. We'll jump into it. Let's dive in. Let's do a little science. I'm going nitty gritty science right now.
I've been looking forward to this.
Kind of going on a little bit of a tangent.
Oh yeah, that's right. I forgot about that.
The information we discuss in this podcast is not meant to be taken as medical advice. It is simply informative. We're not affiliated with any organization or institution, just a few guys talking science and having fun.
All right. Thanks for tuning in to another Kickback Science episode. Today we have Dr. Peter Smoak. So I've already done the introduction at this point. You will have heard that. But what I didn't say is Dr. Smoak actually got his PhD at the University of Northern Colorado, where I got my PhD. And he was just finishing up by the time I was getting started. So a lot of what I learned was actually from Dr. Smoak. And he was doing much cooler research than me. That's why we're interviewing him today. Much more of a nerd than I am. Isn't that right, Peter?
Absolutely.
So tell us a little bit about what got you into just doing research? Like, why'd you become a scientist? Like, where did this all start? And just give us a sense of the journey that led you to where you are right now, you know, being a professor at New Mexico State and doing research in diabetes.
Yeah, absolutely. So I always joke about this. I started out as your typical gym bro. 100%. I started researching because it was available and because I wanted to know how to be bigger. I wanted to be the biggest dude possible. And so I started doing some nutritional research and dietary research where I could basically do anything but steroids and see if I could get larger. And that's kind of how I started. And then I followed that with, it was very much nutrition and performance based until I got to Northern Colorado. And then I started focusing on disease because I realized that I should focus on someone besides myself. And instead of making millionaires more millions of dollars, let me help people that actually need it. And so that's where cancer came in. And I started looking at kefir and cancer. And then after I got all these gray hairs from finishing my PhD, I went to do my postdoc, and I was presented with two different postdocs. One of them was at University of Alabama, Birmingham, which would have focused on cancer, but a lot more clinical. Or where I ended up going, which was Pennington Biomedical Research Center, where my whole focus with that was not cancer, but diabetes. And what happened was my postdoc advisor actually talked me into switching because he was telling me that diabetes and cancer go down a lot of the same pathways. So a lot of what I learned would already translate. And I really wanted to learn more of the biochemistry side of things. And he was a biochemist. So I switched gears, reluctantly moved back to Louisiana for a while, And then, I finished my postdoc. I loved it. I really liked the biochemistry side. I was tasked with looking at plants that were native to the area and trying to figure out the active components to improve diabetes. And then I took my newfound knowledge with me to New Mexico State, where I currently am teaching and researching.
So you're doing the same like type of research at New Mexico that you were in your postdoc, correct?
Similar. Yeah. Similar. With my postdoc, I was focusing on a couple pathways or a couple projects. One was nutritional and the other was looking at mechanisms of diabetes. Here, I'm focused purely on treatment of diabetes.
Okay. That's funny that you had to like try to get as big as you can without steroids and then it led you to where you are now. That's kind of what started with me. I was like, I knew I wanted to do something with sports, and then I got into like strength and conditioning, started working with the soccer team at Mankato, and then I realized like I don't even know how to play these sports. Like, what the hell am I doing? Being the one trying to tell you what to do. Like, I could study it, but I was like, all right, like no one wants some asshole who's just telling them how to train that doesn't even know how to play the sports because I'm not very athletic. So I was like, and then I fell into like a whole different passion. Um, Cool. Well, I love that. So before we dive into it, if you had to declare one food as the ultimate superfood for health, what would it be and why?
Oh Lord, that's hard. One food. Damn, that's a tough one. Like you can only eat one food.
Yeah, well, no, like pick one that is like the food that you would tell everyone, like, eat this food.
Well, then I'm gonna have to go with kefir.
I figured. I didn't know because you're doing all this other research, and I was like, yeah, this is kind of a gimme. So
I'd have to go.
I have for the listeners. So we did a gut health podcast where, after that documentary, "You Are What You Eat" came out, we just like summarized some of the research with that, and then I talked about kefir and brought up your research. So some of the listeners are going to be familiar with it, but just give us a little background, like what the hell is kefir?
Yeah, sure. So kefir is a fermented milk product. There's actually two forms. So you can do water kefir, which is based off of any kind of juice or drink that has sugar. As long as you have a sugar, the lactic acid bacteria can ferment it. But the most common type, which was the original type, there's debate as to whether it originated in Turkey or Russia, but it's a fermented milk drink. So I always describe it as kefir, but as yogurt, but a little bit more liquidy and much more powerful. So what's really cool about kefir is you still get the milk proteins, but you don't get the lactose because the lactose has been metabolized by the bacteria. So people who are lactose intolerant can still handle it. But aside from all the awesome probiotics that you get that not only can help to populate the gut, they survive the intestinal barrage of insults. So a lot of probiotics, when you take them, they can't get past the stomach or the duodenum. They get broken down. Kefir, because it has this exopolysaccharide mixture of yeast and bacteria, they can survive the intestines and they can make it all the way to the lower intestine where they can populate the colon. But so besides the fact that you can help to repopulate or improve your intestinal microbiota, it also has conjugated linolenic acids, which can help to promote GLP-1 is one of them. It can help to promote anti-inflammatory mechanisms. There is short chain fatty acids. So like butyric acid is probably the biggest one. But of course, there's, propionate as well. And then those can help to cause a reduction in inflammation, but they also help to tolerate or increase immune tolerance so that they I always say, so I teach anatomy and physiology, and in my class, we talk about the digestive system, and me being a gut nerd, I have to talk about it. And I say the immune system and the gut bacteria don't like each other, but they tolerate each other. So the immune system is always trying to kill those bacteria because they're bacteria. We have these, receptors for LPS and all of this. But the good bacteria have figured out a way to basically fight against the immune system. And they do that by things like butyric acid and propionic acid and all of those. And then, of course, you get proteins with it. And we get those postbiotics, which are going to be those short chain fatty acids as well. So there's so much good stuff with kefir. It's probably the one thing I would recommend, as long as you can tolerate the taste.
Yeah. So with the like short chain fatty acids, the postbiotics, are those in all fermented foods? Like these microbes that are within the probiotic are spitting those out. But wouldn't you and if that's the case, which I assume it is, correct? Yeah. Okay. Wouldn't that also be happening in like your Activia and those yogurts and such?
Yeah, for sure.
But it's just not as potent.
The big difference is the amount of probiotics. So generally, probiotics are measured in what's called colony forming units, or CFU. Yeah. And to put it into perspective, a good Activia probiotic yogurt is probably going to have somewhere around 10 to 100 million CFU in a container. A probiotic pill is probably going to have somewhere between 500 to a billion CFU. Kefir can have up to 1 trillion CFU. Yeah, it's super, super potent. And now this isn't your commercial kefir. This is going to be your made kefir. The commercial ones are probably closer to like, a few billion. It's still more potent. But because there's so much more probiotics and there's so many more diverse probiotics, your ability to generate these short chain fatty acids goes up.
Okay. So actually first, because this is a good segue to your dissertation research. I mean, you had cancer patients that were going through treatment, taking a kefir supplement after they worked out, and they were taking it like 3 times a week, correct? And
After every workout, 3 times a week.
Okay.
And
for 12 weeks.
For 12 weeks. Well, what did you find in that research?
I found that kefir is badass. Basically, this is why I promote it.
That's the title of the study.
Yeah, everybody you talk to, you can ask them. The 2 things I push are kefir and fiber, 100%. But what we found was exercise improved their overall health. We know this. Mm-hmm. Kefir promoted increased effects on pretty much everything. So we looked at where to start. We'll start with gut dysbiosis. So gut dysbiosis is basically the intestines, the colon now has a messed up population of bacteria. So usually the good microbes have been outnumbered by the bad microbes, and they lead to things like mucositis, which is that mucosal lining has been degraded. And it's generally due to the fact that we need short chain fatty acids and things of that nature to promote mucin production, to increase that mucosal lining, but also radiation and chemo destroy that mucosal lining. And so what we found was in our cancer patients, they actually had moderately high circulating levels of LPS in their blood. And so LPS causes pretty aggressive inflammatory responses. And when we gave them the kefir for 12 weeks, it drastically reduced their circulating LPS concentrations. And it also, as self-reported, it significantly reduced their feeling of gastrointestinal distress. So less vomiting, less acid reflux, less diarrhea, less cramping, less gas. So it really suppressed it from a gut level. We also saw this in our circulating monocyte concentration. So basically, chemo destroys rapidly producing cells. It was destroying our immune cells. And so what we found was the exercise group did not really have a significant change. There was a small change in a couple populations, but the kefir plus exercise group significantly improved our inflammatory monocyte population, where it increased overall monocyte numbers, which is a very good indicator of a functional immune system. But it also suppressed those inflammatory ones that are known to cause things like heart disease and atherosclerosis and several of those. And then finally, it also improved some circulating markers of inflammation like TNF alpha and interferon gamma. And then those have been shown to increase fatigue and depression. And so by reported as things like the Beck depression scale and the Piper fatigue scale, it also showed that it significantly improved their fatigue and their depression beyond that of just exercise alone.
Dude, that's wild. That's like when we did our episode about the gut and like the communication it has with the rest of the body. Like people are always thinking like, oh, I need a healthy gut so I don't get diarrhea. And like you don't think about the influence that those like healthy microbes in the gut lining have on the immune system. And then like you said, GLP-1, like you increase this GLP-1 production, then you're influencing metabolic health and diabetes and then mental health too. Like it's insane. Yeah. And I hear you with like the fiber. You're like, okay, kefir and fiber, because if you don't have the healthy gut, or if you establish this healthy gut, like the fiber, I assume you recommend it because you want to maintain that healthy gut. Like they need to eat.
Yeah, that's so I always joke. I just finished my digestive system lectures last week. And so I always joke that we eat like crap as a society. At least in the Western society, we eat like absolute garbage. So we have to give them probiotics, but we have to give them prebiotics to help flush all this garbage out. And so fiber is a prebiotic. It helps to feed them. It increases basically these bacteria are going to rely on fiber, insoluble fibers that we can't break down. They will break them down. Like cellulose is a big one, and mucin. So we're going to stimulate the production of mucin, and they can eat the mucus production, which helps to keep them alive, and then in turn makes more because they produce more short chain fatty acids. We have to keep them alive. Especially what's interesting is kefir has the ability to populate pretty effectively. Some of the other probiotics, you have to constantly keep them alive. Kefir's pretty good at surviving, but fiber is just so important to help keep everything happy, including the non-probiotics that we have not consumed, but are just normal gut flora.
See, but I thought we were all supposed to go carnivore. That's what someone on the internet told me.
That's right. Carnivore all the way. There's some studies showing that also affects gut microbiota quite a bit too. Like your diet, carnivore is a big one, right? Because there's a huge push right now for it. And carnivore is weird because it's like, yeah, there's some benefits, but also are those benefits just because you've taken out all the processed crap?
Yeah.
So
exactly.
carnivores, I think it'd be an interesting study to actually look at carnivore and see what it does long.
And we just don't have those data yet. That's my take on it though. Like at this point, without like we don't know enough, but it sure would make sense that if you're reducing all these processed foods, like non-nutrient dense, high sugar foods that people are eating, because there's like the Harvard, it's like that famous like top 10 foods that we eat in the United States. Number one is like just sweet desserts. Like that was a food category. It was just desserts. So you're getting rid of that and you're going to be healthier.
That's my guilty, one of those practice what you preach. I have so much trouble. I'm so addicted to sugar, unfortunately.
Dude, yeah, I have a hard time. Allie has to hide. If we have candy, she's got to hide it because if I get a piece, I'm going to eat like 15. I'm better off just not having it in the house and then I won't eat it.
That's what I do. I remember I had my brother come over. He came to visit and he was like, dude, you have nothing in the house. I was like, I have good food in the house, but I will eat all of this garbage if it's in the house.
Yeah. Allie's sister does the same thing. She just makes fun of us every time she comes over.
That's really funny.
All right. So kind of segueing more into what you're doing now. So this, kefir was what you did in your PhD. And it sounds like you're still doing a lot of research with that. But I want to get into diabetes because this is such a, and I'm talking type 2 diabetes specifically here. So, in some other podcasts, we've gone over type 1 and type 2 diabetes. Type 1 being, typically you're going to notice it when you're younger. It's just being the pancreas's inability to produce insulin, versus type 2 tends to be more of like an acquired metabolic disease. And you're going to speak more on it because you're the expert here, but just to kind of lay the groundwork. And it's such a burden. Like today in the clinic, I mean, every day, especially in like a family medicine setting, that's all it is patients coming in for A1C checks and to monitor their medications or their diabetes medications. And then once you get diagnosed with diabetes, you got to be thrown on a statin. And so you've got all these patients that are dealing with this disease in the United States. And it's such a problem because, I mean, it seems like there's so much preventable with diabetes. So to get into that, tell us about like what's a healthy pancreas, what's an unhealthy pancreas, and just what is diabetes?
Okay. Yeah, sure. So yeah, you kind of talked about it. The type 1 is definitely more autoimmune generally. What's interesting with that though, is they're finding more and more people are starting to develop type 1 in adulthood, which is pretty crazy. I also wouldn't call myself an expert. I'm just enough to be dangerous, but, yeah. So type 2 is basically what you said. It starts out as insufficient insulin production. Eventually, it can actually lead into deterioration or dedifferentiation of those pancreatic beta cells, which then causes insulin dependence. And now you're basically at a type 1 level. But a normal, healthy pancreas, what a lot of people don't realize is about 95% of the pancreatic function is not endocrine. It's digestive. So only that small little bit of pancreatic function that's non-acinar tissue is insulin or glucagon. And so a healthy pancreatic cell, basically what it does is under starved state, it actually relies on fats. So it's going to rely on fatty acid breakdown, beta oxidation, all of that. And then as insulin is presented in the blood sugar, it has a channel. It's a GLUT2 transporter that allows glucose to enter in, and it immediately converts it to glucose 6-phosphate. And once that happens, it starts causing insulin production. So it's going to run through glycolysis, but at the same time, it's going to cause insulin release. And then insulin's going to go and be transported. It's going to bind to, I don't know how specific you want me to get it. Sorry, I dropped something.
You don't have to go like super mechanistically deep. Okay. Do it if you want to, because I know there's a lot of people who are going to be into it, but then there's also like quite a few listeners who aren't, don't have the extensive physiology background.
I could talk about like tyrosine kinase and all of that if you want me to, but
no, you don't have to. Unless it applies specifically to a point you're trying to make.
No. So basically insulin's going to be released into the liver. It's going to act, into the bloodstream. It's going to act on those cells, and glucose will basically be uptaken again by that GLUT4 transporter. But insulin, I always equate it to, it is the key that opens the door. So it unlocks the door and it allows glucose utilization transport proteins to pull glucose into the cell. Under normal conditions, it all works great. We have glucose comes in, we eat a carb-rich meal, and then insulin is going to be produced in response to that. And then it goes to the cell and it accurately tells glucose to be picked up and put into the cell and turn into fat or glycogen or whatever we're trying to do with it. However, with diabetes, what ends up happening initially is going to be, we're going to get what's called an ER stress response, where now we have a high demand for excess insulin. So as you are eating more and more sugar or whatever you're doing, it could also be you're getting older, or there's a bunch of things. But now all of a sudden, your demand for insulin production goes up. It could be, again, because you're eating garbage. It could be because you're getting a bunch of metabolic you're going through a metabolic disease, maybe obesity, and now your insulin's not working as well. So you're going to get what's called endoplasmic reticulum stress. That's going to cause an increase in inflammation. And now, initially, you're going to get compensation. So you'll get interleukin 1 release by those macrophages. And then interleukin 1 is going to cause the pancreatic beta cells, those insulin cells, to get bigger. They'll grow because now they're starting to put more insulin into those cells. But over time, chronic, constant insulting with inflammation, they can't handle it. And now ER stress takes over. The membranes of the cells start to degrade, and now you have dead pancreatic cells. So as the pancreatic beta cells start to die, now you are stuck with inability to produce insulin. And so now you are insulin dependent.
Okay, sure. So that's like late type 2 diabetes, and those are the folks that are requiring insulin. But if you can direct treatment before it gets to that point, are those changes in the beta cells, are those reversible? Like, because I know with like just cellular physiology, there's certain changes within the cell that can be reversed, but as soon as the membrane is damaged, that you can't, there's no going back from that, right?
So the benefit of the pancreatic beta cells is we can replace them.
Okay.
So they're actually doing some really cool stuff with islet transplants. I think they just had a few in Japan where they're taking healthy pancreatic islets and they're transplanting into type 1 and type 2 diabetics.
Dang.
But we have the ability to kind of stop diabetes in its track if we take care of it. Of course, the most common is exercise. Exercise is so important. I always equate it to, again, that lock, and the lock is the key to the lock is insulin, and GLUT4 picks it up. But if you exercise, you can leave the door ajar, and now you don't need that key to unlock the door. GLUT4 can take it up. So that's kind of a double-edged sword, not in a bad way, but you're going to improve glucose uptake, but at the same time, you're probably going to lose some weight, and you're going to take some of that stress off of your insulin producing cells anyway, which improves it as it is. If people would exercise, a lot of them could reverse their type 2 diabetes. But the other side is, there's medications that can hinder inflammatory responses. And if we can suppress it enough before it gets too far, there will be a point of no return. But if we can suppress it enough, then we can stimulate the pancreatic beta cells can undergo destruction where they die, or they can go through something called dedifferentiation, which is where they turn into the precursor to beta cells. And the precursor, basically, depending on signaling, can go to alpha cells to produce glucagon or beta cells to produce insulin. So they can dedifferentiate and get stuck in that path. But if we can stop the chronic assault, we can cause them to go back to beta cells.
Okay, sure. And like once somebody is using insulin though, like is there any going back from that?
So again, that whole pancreatic islet transplant thing is really cool, and it's very, very, it's looking promising. But I'm actually studying something right now that looks pretty promising as well. So my research, one of my projects is I'm repurposing a drug called dimethyl fumarate, and this is an MS drug. So I don't remember the actual like FDA approved name, but it is an MS drug. And what's really cool, we're in the final steps of this project. It is upregulating something called homeobox factor in KX6.1. Big long name, but basically this is a gene and a protein that causes the stability of pancreatic beta cells survival. It basically improves their function and their stability, but it can also increase generation of new pancreatic beta cells. That with something called PDX1. So this is promising. What inspired this study was there was not a bad study, just kind of a general study that was done in, I think, 2021, where they took these mice that spontaneously develop type 1 diabetes, and they gave them DMF, dimethyl fumarate. And what it showed was, don't quote me on the number, but I believe about 70% of the NOD mice did not develop diabetes. And so they looked at some inflammatory markers, but what inspired me was they didn't look at how it was working. They only saw that it was working. And so that inspired me to start looking at how it's actually working. And it looks like DMF is nuts. It downregulates almost every inflammatory gene that I've thrown at it. And it seems to be upregulating that homeobox in KX6.1, which helps to protect the stability and generation of new beta cells.
Dang. So this is a pharmaceutical, a medication that's already available.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, it's already approved for multiple sclerosis in the US. It's also approved, I believe, in Germany for psoriasis treatment. But there's nothing really on diabetes, which is why I started, minus that one study I found. But it's so anti-inflammatory. I wanted to see what was happening.
Interesting.
Okay. Now, to build off of that a little bit, you've done, you've published some papers on, I saw one review article with just a ton of different botanical interventions for diabetes, as well as I saw you published a paper on the active component of tarragon. You've done all this work with these botanical supplements for diabetes. Where are we at with that? Like, are there any of these, herbs and supplements that are showing promise, like the pharmaceutical industry, or even like exercise?
Yeah. So what's interesting is up until about probably somewhere about 5-10 years ago, that's all they did initially. They would send these pharmaceutical companies out to random places across the world that believed they were improving health. They would go to not witch doctors, but they would go to like these tribal medicine doctors, and they would go to all these different people and they would say, what do you got? And they would say, oh, this plant here is for this. This plant here is for this. And they would take it back and they would start studying what they believe to be the active component. One of the best examples is metformin. So I always joke that metformin is prescribed for everything, right? It's like, I have diabetes, metformin. I have PCOS, metformin. I broke my arm, metformin. But metformin is derived from French lilac or goat's rue. And so they found the active component. What's funny is metformin is actually not the most active component. There are two others, but they had to be shelved because they had some black box issues. But metformin is really, really, it's pretty effective, and it was derived from that same way. But going back to your other stuff, yeah, I'm really interested in finding local plants and seeing if they can improve diabetes. So I'm also studying chili peppers at the moment, where I'm in New Mexico. You have to study chili, right?
Sure. Yep.
So we took carotenoid extracts, and we're currently looking at carotenoid extracts and how they improve inflammatory responses related to diabetes as well. And then, of course, exercise. Exercise reduces so much. I mean, that actually, I think I watched a couple of your podcasts. I think one of the ones you said was like, the best medicine that you can possibly use is exercise. And it's really true. We've just gotten so sedentary as a lifestyle that, we're not made to sit around all day. We're made to move. So that's why when you look at people from the 20s who are out in the fields all day compared to now, we look like crap. And it's because we sit all day.
Well, and so many people are like, I don't exercise because it doesn't help you lose weight. And like, that's all people care about is weight loss. And it's like, no, you should not care about how much you weigh. Hi, dude. Kato just came running in. That shouldn't be people's primary concern. Like, overall health doesn't, weight is a factor when most of that weight is made up of adipose tissue. But yeah, I'm a little bit biased, but I always say, like, there's nothing that is going to improve your health more than exercise.
I'm a little biased too. I always joke that I exercise to just not get too fat. And my whole thing is health now. Like, it used to be, I want to be big and I want to be ripped, but now it's more like I want to play with my grandkids if I have grandkids. Yeah. Like, I don't want to be 60 years old and using a walker. I want to be able to like run.
Exactly. So with these like I know in that review article that you published with like berberine and curcumin and all these different botanical interventions, like do any of them, I know that like most of them, the answer is probably going to be there needs to be more research done, but are any of them looking like more impressive than others? Is there any of them that you're really focusing your attention on?
So out of those, ginger is a really big, and gingerol, which is the active component they believe, seems to be really effective. Green tea extract. So I can never say that word. Epicatacolicin. I forgot what it is. It's EGCG. It is really, really cool. So that one has quite a bit of research on it. And it's just extracted from green tea. And then berberine is a huge one. Berberine's really, really impressive, especially for reducing pancreatic stress. But again, yeah, they all need more research. And a lot of them are only done in like basic science or animal models. And unfortunately, we can get into human trials and they don't work. So it's one of those like, yes, but also maybe not.
Well, I feel like it's so hard to study those things in humans anyways. Like it, just like any nutritional intervention, it's just impossible to like control, to run a controlled study. But the is most of the mechanism that you've seen so far with these things like berberine and with ginger, is it an anti-inflammatory, like antioxidant property of these medications that's protecting the pancreas?
It's actually both. So you get the anti-inflammatory capacity. I also forgot to mention on my DMF one too, but they also stimulate an increase in insulin production.
Oh, okay.
So not only do you get a reduction in inflammatory signaling, we need some. So we did a study in my lab, not my lab, but my postdoc lab a long time ago. And what they showed was if you completely eradicate inflammatory signaling to the pancreas, the cells will die.
Sure.
But you need some, but too much is bad. So there's this fine line that you have to walk. But what ends up happening with some of these is they end up trying not to get too mechanistic. They increase something called sirtuin pathways, and sirtuin, insert 1, insert 3 are big. They promote the increase in islet insulin production. So they seem to be activating these SIRT pathways. There's a few others that they can activate as well. So it's kind of both. They reduce the inflammatory stressors. They help to reduce, free radicals. EGCG is a phenomenal free radical destroyer. It's a very good antioxidant. But it also seems to be helping with insulin production as well.
That's crazy. I would have not thought that it would have had an impact on insulin production.
Yeah, wait till you see my DMF study. It's nuts how much insulin production it increases.
Is that in mice?
This is actually just in immortalized pancreatic beta cells at the moment.
Oh, okay.
So
you guys just like isolate these pancreatic beta cells, and then you toss in some of whatever component and look at insulin production?
Pretty much. Yeah. So we have these cells that we grow and then we put on whatever we want. I mean, there's a barrage of tests. We have to look first to find out how much is too much. The first time I did this, I'm comparing it to another Krebs cycle intermediate, which is dimethyl malate. It's just a methylated version. But I was using the molar concentration of dimethyl malate, and my cells died within 10 minutes. They just went and just disintegrated. So I realized I had to very, very, very drastically reduce the amount of DMF because it's so much more potent. But so we ran through tests of making sure that they were survivable. And then we looked at insulin and some inflammatory stuff. But I mean, we're getting like a 4-fold insulin, high glucose stimulated insulin response increase.
Dang.
And then what's really cool is inflammation reduces high glucose stimulated insulin production. And this is protecting it. So we're still seeing a higher high glucose insulated, high glucose stimulated insulin secretion under inflammatory conditions with DMF, it's even still higher than the non-inflammatory high glucose stimulated control.
That's crazy. You're such a nerd.
I mean, I geek out about random things, but it sounds way crazier than it is. I mean, I have undergrads doing this research.
That's awesome. See, I was just diving into your research a little bit, and wasn't looking at the mechanisms of all these things you're studying. I just assumed, okay, like we hear all the time, this herb is used for these diseases because it has anti-inflammatory, antioxidant properties. And then we know, like, well, and you explained it at the beginning of the podcast about how this is such an inflammatory condition in ways, but never did I think insulin was going to be impacted. So with that, like these GLP-1 agonist medications, so like semaglutide and tirzepatide, everyone's on them right now. I mean, everyone comes into the clinic and is wanting to start them, no matter if they're healthy or unhealthy. Like, it's crazy. So, but I know that GLP-1 is this peptide that we produce naturally from our gut, and it increases insulin production and then also slows down gastric motility. And, you got these things that can influence insulin production. And it makes me think, like, do we recommend these natural routes before GLP-1? Like, really, what are your thoughts on these GLP-1 agonist medications?
So those are interesting because I find that it's the easy way out currently. My dad is a type 2 diabetic. My dad is also severely overweight. It got worse. He had prostate cancer, and the Lupron just screwed up his everything because now he doesn't have a lot of testosterone. So his weight shot up. But he's lazy because he said he doesn't have energy. Now, I've tried to tell him, if you exercise, it will give you energy, but he doesn't. So it has helped him to lose some weight, and he feels a little bit better. But yeah, I think there's definitely stuff out there that is safer because the GLP-1 stuff is so new. I remember whenever I was in my postdoc, we were talking about GLP-1 agonists, and there's a protein called FGF21 that they were also looking at. This was kind of before the whole GLP-1 agonist took storm, but I mean, they're finding so many side effects with it. And it's like, we're basically becoming the guinea pigs when we take it because they found that it works, but we have no long-term data on this stuff. So using more natural stuff, not everything natural is good, right? I mean, there's some pretty strong toxins that are natural, but natural is better. So yeah, I think there's probably better things out there to improve our health before we start turning to drugs. The reason why I went to the DMF side is because it seems to be that it might be something that may help to, if not reverse, at least mitigate the long-term diabetic effects. So that's why I was like, ooh, this shows promise because we want to, insulin is great. Insulin's a good, helper, but it doesn't fix the issue.
I was mostly trying to set you up to speak negatively about GLP-1s. I'm just kidding.
They're not great. We don't know the long-term effects of them is the biggest issue.
Yeah, I mean, and I just get concerned because of how many people are on these medications. But like you said, I mean, it is important for people who aren't able to get ahead and take care of their health. Like it works. It reduces A1C like crazy. Like we see so many patients like in a crazy, like a very short amount of time, we see these significant drops in A1C and weights coming off. But then you got everyone coming in that's like, oh, I'm feeling nauseous. I don't want to eat. My stomach hurts. I feel like I'm constantly like have this diarrhea, and everyone just has these crazy side effects. And,
my dad was like, I lost a bunch of weight, and I was like, oh yeah. He's like, yeah, this medication that I'm taking, I think he's on Ozempic. He was like, I can't eat, and I was like, well, that's why you feel like garbage, but that's why you're losing weight. is because
Yeah.
you're not eating.
Exactly.
So it's like you might as well take Ipecac.
What is Ipecac?
It's something that induces vomiting.
Oh. Yeah, literally. I mean, there is like those like appetite suppressants that just make people.
Yeah, I mean, then you might as well do that, right? It's one of those things where you're going to lose weight, and losing weight is going to help to reduce the stress on your body.
Right. Yeah. I mean, in a problem with med school that I've noticed is we don't learn about exercise. We don't learn about nutrition. I mean, you breeze over it, and when we touch on it in our classes, it's as much as the professor just says, "Oh yeah, exercise helps with cardiovascular disease," something like that, and eat a healthy diet. And throughout my like clinical training, you see this time and time again where the physicians are like, "Oh yeah, just make sure you focus on exercise, focus on your diet, focus on your sleep," and that's all because they don't have the background to actually give specifics there. And the analogy that I give with this 150 minutes per week, like that is this number that gets thrown around by physicians. Like that seems to be what people latch onto. The analogy that I give is like, imagine them telling you, here's your blood pressure medication. The dose is, right around 7 pills per week, but you can take as many as you want when you want. Just make sure that you hit this many pills in this range. Like, it doesn't make any sense. And I say all this to say, I mean, I feel super passionate about trying to bring lifestyle interventions into medicine. But like with diabetes specifically, like what types of obstacles or what misconceptions, I should say, do you see from the like healthcare field? Like this detachment from like clinicians to what you're actually finding in your lab. Like what are some misconceptions there, and what are some things to help with those?
Yeah. I think the first, and I see it on the internet all the time, misconception is eating too much sugar causes diabetes. And that's garbage. Eating too much sugar does not cause diabetes. It causes an increase in insulin. You get an insulin crash and then or spike and then you crash. But there's people who are morbidly obese and will never develop diabetes. They can compensate enough. So what really does it is just poor overall lifestyle. But yeah, I find that what usually happens. So my sister is finishing her MD right now. My sister-in-law is doing her MD PhD. And when I try to talk to her about nutrition, she's like, "Oh, the nutritional research is just all over the place. So we don't look at it." I was like, "Are you kidding me? That is the most garbage thing I've ever heard." Cause they say, "Oh, it's not up to the medical par." And that's garbage, 100% garbage. I mean, I'm for all intents and purposes, I'm a trained biochemist. I literally study the biochemistry of this stuff.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where that's a big one. And then the other thing is that I feel like a lot of times physicians don't have time to really delve into the literature. So, or you don't understand how to do it, where it's one of those things where you might get, and you don't take this the wrong way because you have a PhD, but a lot of times physicians, I do reviews sometimes of their articles, and I'm all for them researching. That's great. But oh my goodness, they need to teach you guys how to write.
Dude, yeah. Well, we don't get any you get like a research methods portion of a class where you talk about stats and a little bit, actually more than I thought, about the statistical side of things, but not even close to what we had to do in our PhD. And yeah, the like research side of things, no one's reading research because they don't have time. It's just like going on Up to Date, the software, and just Googling, like searching a disease, and then it reviews everything for you, and you just like take that as fact, take that as gold. Anything that's not in there is never going to be something that is reviewed. Yeah, so that is a huge problem.
100%. And I get it. Like physicians are busy. I totally get that. You have a lot of people to get through, but that's the biggest issue is how are you supposed to stay up to date with evidence-based practices if you don't have time to look at the evidence? And
Right.
so that's a big push. And, you know, the pharmaceutical industry comes in and they're like, hey, use this pill and this will solve the problems. And so they push that. And then now, next thing you know, why would I take, why would I use exercise and use, a better diet whenever my doctor says I can just take this pill and it will stop it? I can go back to watching Netflix or football and eating pizza and drinking beer.
Yeah, that's what's going to be so dangerous about these like GLP-1s. And now I know like retatrutide is another one that is right now finishing. I think they're in like phase 3 clinical trial right now. And that one impacts GLP-1, GIP, and glucagon. And like there's just going to be evolving GLP-1, basically just weight loss medications. And everyone's just going to be like, oh, well, I can treat my body like shit because I'll just go get my doctor to write me this medication prescription.
Yeah. Have you seen the research with Roux-en-Y surgeries?
That's I have, but that stuff's kind of phasing out. It seems like the Roux-en-Y.
So, have you seen it with diabetes?
No, because I don't think it's very common anymore. Correct?
So it's being pushed again. So where I did my postdoc, our two main focuses were diabetes and obesity. They are pushing it again because what they have found is if you do a Roux-en-Y, almost instantaneously, diabetes is cured.
And does that just have to do with a decrease in consumption?
No, it's like they have the surgery, they recover, their blood sugar is back to normal. Like not weight loss, not anything, literally like within hours of them having the surgery.
Do we know why that might be?
They're studying it right now. I'm not sure. I haven't kept up to date with it, but I remember someone was giving a talk and I was like, oh my goodness, that is nuts.
So isn't the Roux-en-Y just essentially like you're just like skipping a portion of the
they're basically like sectioning out a small piece of the stomach and they're bypassing the duodenum.
Yeah. Huh. That's crazy.
It's nuts. I don't know why. The only thing I could think of is maybe it's taking some of the pressure off the pancreas because it's not having to do as much or as much digestive secretions. I don't know, but it's crazy. But again, same kind of thing. Eat like garbage, get really fat, go get your stomach stapled. Okay, you're good. Repeat.
Oh, it's such a problem. Yeah, I don't know. I do think that it is changing as far as like people are talking more about the issues with the pharmaceutical industries and like healthcare organizations and health insurances and healthcare administrations and the like profitability of this industry and how like people are they shy away from the idea that there's corruption and it's hard to talk about for some reason, but then yet everyone knows that there's corruption here and like certain medications are beneficial for people, but we always want to try to like approach lifestyle factors, but it's hard to do that when you've got this medical school curriculum that's set up to help physicians pass their boards exam, but the boards exam, like the entire organization that dictates what's on the boards, is pushing the curriculums that are focused on pharmaceuticals. So how can you change it? It just doesn't seem like the curriculum's ever going to change, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just one of those things where it takes people like you to try to at least influence the people that you can. Because it really is.
That's how you make it. I'm just trying to pretend like I know shit and then get people to listen to me.
I mean, that's all you can do. I remember my grandmother, are you familiar with scleroderma?
Scleroderma, a little bit.
Hardening of the skin and all that. So she had scleroderma when she got older. And they gave her, like, it was like every time they gave her medication for scleroderma. Then whenever she had an issue with, it was essentially a side effect, they'd give her something else. And then she had a side effect with that medication. So I remember the scleroderma caused incontinence. I know scleroderma. The medication for scleroderma, I believe, was causing incontinence. So they gave her something for incontinence, but that caused constipation. So they gave her something for constipation, but that caused blood pressure issues. And it was like, for one thing, she was taking like 20 different medications for all the side effects. And it's like,
Yeah.
like scleroderma is one of those bad ones because it's just a disease that keeps getting worse. But like, come on, that's crazy.
And that's what happens. Like, so our standard of care, like the approach to someone with diabetes, for example, we know, so a patient comes in and you check blood sugar levels, and you're not just going to diagnose someone with diabetes if they have elevated blood sugar at one time, unless it's like way above 200. Then typically you're going to want like repeat fasting labs, or you check an A1C. But then you get to the point where like, okay, they do have diabetes, and then it's a matter of, okay, what is this person at risk for? And we know high blood sugar impacts, I mean, whatever you name the organ, it's going to have an impact. But the number one killer of somebody with diabetes is a cardiovascular related issue. So typically, like every patient with diabetes is put on a statin, even if their cholesterol looks fine. And I find that really strange. But like insurance companies, or even like the hospital or the clinic, they're gonna question like, oh, you had a patient with diabetes, why aren't they on a statin? They need to be on a statin. And like are pushing physicians to do this, whether or not their cholesterol levels are bad. And so then you're on the statin, and then you have side effects for that. And then like, yeah, you get into this spiral of being on meds.
Yeah. Have you seen so I don't know if you know this, but people that have diabetes have a much higher chance of developing Alzheimer's.
Yeah. It's like type 3 diabetes technically, right?
That's what they call it, is type 3. And it's the same thing. But there's some studies showing that there seems to be some links with Alzheimer development and statins, because it's basically robbing the body of cholesterol that it needs to establish the brain. And so there's some interesting stuff with that. So now you're just compounding it, right? You have a statin that seems to be causing some issues with things like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like swan cell development. But then also you've got type 3 diabetes. So yeah, it's a mess.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like you said, it's a system that needs to be overhauled, but it's tough.
So if you were going to teach a class at a medical school, it's like, what is the main point with diabetes that you would like to make for healthcare providers?
That's, I would say that's a tough one, because it's really, you need to focus on reducing inflammation. And by reducing inflammation, you're going to improve pancreatic function, because too much inflammation is going to cause that destruction. But that's really the big one. Like, there's other things that we can get into, like improving, sirtuin and like PGC and all of these things, but really anti-inflammatory, not ibuprofen or not naproxen or not any of this stuff. That'll help short term, but like getting rid of those excessive free radicals and that ER stress is really the big thing, because the root of most diseases, especially metabolic diseases, is excessive inflammation.
Yeah. So when we're using these medications, like typically we'll start with metformin. Like you said, everyone goes on metformin. There's like the anti-aging study with metformin right now. Like, should everyone be on metformin? But you'll start with metformin, and then you'll go to SGLT2 inhibitor. So try to reduce reuptake of glucose in the kidney, and then you'll move to like sulfonylureas to try to impact the pancreas. But most of these medications are just trying to reduce blood sugar levels. So are we kind of just not or just like taking care of a symptom there? Like, do those medications actually deal with what you're talking about and reducing the inflammation and reversing this disease? Do they do that at all?
So the only way I can think of them doing, they won't reverse it. That's the reason why people get on metformin and they're on metformin forever. Metformin is a really cool one. And I think there's some really interesting stuff coming out with it because it does have some anti-aging properties.
Mm-hmm.
But the only thing I can think of from a long-term standpoint is reducing the stress on the pancreas. So by inhibiting, excessive glucagon and liver release of glucose and inhibiting reuptake of glucose in the kidneys and all of that, it just makes it a little bit less of our struggles for our beta cells to be able to, keep up. But that's, like I said, that's like basically opening up a dam and then going 6 miles down the river and trying to use a bucket to get the water out. You need to stop the dam, not try to get the water out way down there.
Yeah. I mean, and that, like, hearing you talk this whole time about like the inflammatory aspect on the pancreas, that just makes so much sense. Because I don't know, when you prescribe medications, you hope that you're trying to treat this condition, and treating the condition would be to try to reverse that if it is reversible, but that's obviously not the case.
Yeah, that's a tough one. It really is. You have to hit the root cause. The biggest issue, I mean, with most medications is like when you affect one system, something else gets affected. So it's trying to figure out how to stop this. That's actually what that DMC2 study was about. Was we looked at 5011, PMI 5011, which is the extract of Russian tarragon, and it was actually more effective in almost everything except for insulin production. DMC2 was the isolated component, and it was so specific in what it stopped that it kind of was a good approach to helping to hopefully improve diabetes without affecting every other system.
Sure. So then you don't have to go on 10 more medications after you're on the one. Right. So to kind of wrap up here, for the listeners, like, what are some take-home tips, some actionable items that people can take from this podcast into their lives about protecting them from getting type 2 diabetes, so preventing it, or, if they have prediabetes or even have diabetes, like, what are some things that can help those patients?
Yeah, exercise. Exercise is the best thing you can do, whether you are pre-diabetic, diabetic, or not close to diabetic. Exercise is going to improve glucose handling. And what's really cool is it can improve it for up to 24 hours after exercise. So if you exercise daily, you're already getting those protective effects from just exercising once a day. Other things are, like, do your research on the things you're being given. So like, I hate that people just take physicians' word and don't question it at all. Yeah. Because it's like, yeah, they're considered the, knowledgeable expert, but they don't know everything, especially when it comes to diet. And, unless you're a specific endocrinologist focusing on diabetes, you don't know every pathway of diabetes. Yeah. And then, eat good. That's a huge one. Eating appropriate, foods will help. And so if you can lose weight, you can improve your diabetes. I know several people who were diagnosed with type 2. They started eating better. They started exercising, and now they're not, they were on insulin and now they're no longer on insulin.
Wow.
Because just most of the time in type 2, we can, even if we can't reverse it, we still have enough moderately okay functional pancreatic beta cells that they can at least keep up, as long as you are not, chronically obese. Because when you start to get too fat, adipocytes can start to block insulin into the cells. So we don't want that to happen. Those would be the big ones. And kefir, always kefir.
Kefir and fiber. So
kefir has been shown to help with diabetes too.
Yeah, I mean, you were talking about like it increases GLP-1 production. And like, you can take a roundabout way of like how gut health can improve pretty much anything. So, but two more things off of that, because you said exercise now, and you said one bout of exercise can have this metabolic impact for 24 hours. Are you talking cardiovascular exercise? Are you talking strength training? Are you talking both? Should people, do higher intensity or lower intensity?
Yeah. Anything from walking on is good. The best way to improve health is as simple as walking. Just getting those muscular contractions is going to help to improve glucose utilization. High intensity exercise is great. The only issue with too high of intensity exercise is you're going to start, if you're not well trained, you're going to start releasing catecholamines like epinephrine and norepinephrine, and those are going to start causing increased glucagon. And now you're back to where you were. So there's kind of a weird, like, it depends on how your body can handle it.
Sure.
But resistance training is great. Resistance training is probably better for glucose uptake than cardiovascular training, but they're both great. You're still getting muscle contractions. You're still getting increased glucose utilization. You're still getting increased uptake of glucose.
I'm glad you said the strength training is probably better, because that's what people just, especially in the healthcare world, like so many physicians are like, exercise, cardiovascular, it's good for your heart, it's good for everything. And like, don't think strength training is safe for people, especially as they age. It's like, no, your muscle can take up so much glucose. Like, if you increase muscle, you've got more of a storage unit.
Plus, you need increased bone density.
Yep.
You're going to increase stressors, which will help to reduce sarcopenia. Like, resistance training is good.
And so, last question, you said eating a healthy diet. And this is, I'm not going to open a can of worms on dieting research or anything here, but do you have any tips that you've found are helpful for managing metabolic health for people that don't know how to eat healthy? Like some easy just tips.
Fat is not a demon. And protein is always good, but fat gets so demonized, and fat is not bad. Too much fat is bad, but normal amounts of fat is totally fine. But a good thing is to go on watch your carbohydrates, because now I'm not saying carbohydrates are bad, but if you can reduce your carbohydrate intake, that takes off some of that insulin load. So by doing that, pushing more protein's always good. Moderate fat and not getting rid of carbs, because we still need carbs, but reducing carbohydrates helps to improve our ability to handle. You're just not putting as much force or stress on your insulin producing cells, so they don't have to work as hard, so they get a little bit of a break.
And is there like some truth to the like sugary drinks cause a higher increase in glucose spike, and therefore then would have a greater impact on the pancreas?
So I don't know if they exactly increase the spike. I don't know. I do know that what are they called? Like diet sodas that have aspartame actually increases your desire to intake sugar, which is interesting. But we do know that they've done satiety studies, and liquid calories are much less effective than solid calories.
Yeah.
So, I mean, drinking, a sugary drink definitely is going to affect. I don't know if it will affect your pancreas. It's probably true, because now you're still going through the digestive system, but it's a little bit different. It's going to rush through, because your GI can handle carbs a lot easier than fat and protein. So
sure,
fat and protein is going to increase feeling of fullness and slow down gastric motility, whereas carbohydrates will run through you. So you're probably getting them faster. You'll probably get a bigger spike.
Yeah. And that's like, if I'm going to speak on nutrition with patients and stuff, usually it's just figure out how to increase protein. Usually people always need more protein. That's going to fill you up. It's going to reduce cravings of this other stuff. And then liquid calories is just usually pretty simple for people to get rid of. But
yeah, for sure. And then watch coffee if you're diabetic.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So not in everybody, but in some people, caffeine can stimulate glucagon and cause a blood sugar spike. It's fine for some people will never have an issue.
Yeah.
Some people will. It just depends on how your body responds to it because caffeine can stimulate a false fight or flight like response. So you're going to get some, some increase in things like adrenal hormones, which are going to cause glucagon. Not everyone has this
Cortisol's going to
issue.
go up.
Yeah.
Yeah. That makes sense to me.
Sweet. Well, thanks, Peter. This was awesome.
Yeah, it was fun.
I think this is going to be super informative for people because it's so applicable. And yeah, excited to have you on.
Yeah, thanks. Happy to join whenever.